Is the water that you're drinking poisoning your body and sabotaging your health? I asked this question last year after spending the best part of the previous 12 months researching deep into the topic of water, and it's something that got a lot of people talking. And to be honest, it even ruffled a few feathers. Now, I'm going to get back onto that question in just a minute. But right now, if you're like most people, when was the last time you sat down to think about it? To think that the water that you're drinking is the one thing you're putting more of in your body than anything else? If you're like most people, you barely give it a second's thought. We spend so much time worrying about the foods that we choose to eat, organic versus non-organic, non-GMO, no MSG, fresh versus frozen, farm-raised versus wild-caught, natural, whole foods, unrefined foods. We focus so much time on making sure the food choices that we make are good for our body, but how much time do we think about the water that we're drinking? Because as long as we're drinking enough, and we're going to get onto exactly how much is enough in just a minute too, then we're all good, right? As long as we remember to drink enough, we'll be healthy. Well, as my video showed last year, this is definitely not the case. And when I released that video, it created a lot of buzz. In fact, it got more views than any other video that I've ever released before, and it spread like crazy on social media. In all, over 400,000 people have seen that video now, but I have to say the response, it was kind of polarizing. While so many people thank me from the bottom of their heart for opening their eyes to what could be the biggest issue blocking their health and energy today, there were a few people that asked me, Ross, why are you being so extreme with this? Well, the reason I was so extreme was because I wanted to get your attention. And the reason I wanted to get your attention was, well, I dived so deep into this topic, and the shocking stuff that I discovered about tap water and bottled water and even some kind of filtered water, well, I just couldn't keep it in, and I owed it to you to get this out there and make sure you watched it. I realised that for 99% of people, no matter whether you're in the USA, the UK, Australia, Canada, New Zealand, no matter where you are in the world, the water you're drinking is not the water that you think you're drinking. And the reason I've updated this video series since then is because since last year there's been even more shocking research that has come out, even more than ever before. And it's not only reinforced what I was saying last year, but it's maybe made me think I was being just a little bit too soft last year in the way that I asked that question. The question being, is the water you're drinking sabotaging your health? Because based on what I've discovered since then, I don't just think tap and bottled and even some kinds of filtered water is just sabotaging your health. I think it's downright destroying it. And unfortunately, things are actually getting worse, not better. Just look at these examples from the past few months this year alone, and these are just a few of the hundreds I've found. Just look at this from the 25th of January 2015 about a brain-eating amoeba in tap water that has led to the death of a child in Louisiana. And from the 28th of January 2015 about E. coli being found in the water in Winnipeg. And this from the 10th of February, where Idaho residents were forced to boil their water because parasites like Cryptosporidium and E. coli were found in the drinking water. And in the UK from the 26th of February 2015, where British water authorities were warning that it is being infected with an algae that is causing Alzheimer's. And this is just from a few weeks at the start of 2015, and these reports alone have affected millions upon millions of unsuspecting people just like you. To be frank, I've been shocked at what I've found, and these reports don't even start to scratch the surface of the 316 contaminants found in drinking water supplied to houses just like yours that the Environmental Working Group have identified. They found 204 chemicals, 97 agricultural pollutants, 86 contaminants that are linked to treatment plants, 42 pollutants that have been leached from pipes and storage tanks. Now, if you're like most health conscious people, when you ask that question, have you ever thought about what's in the water you're drinking and what it's doing to your body? If you're like 99% of people, the answer is no. Because worrying about the quality of your drinking water, well, that's a third world problem, right? Places where the drinking water looks something like this. Because water that looks like this, it's clean, right? I mean, it's safe and therefore it's healthy. You just turn on your faucet, fill your glass and drink, and that's healthy. Well, maybe not. Now, if you're like most people, either following or interested in the alkaline diet, then you probably know that along with eating nutrient-rich alkaline foods, you should be drinking a minimum 3 to 4 litres of good quality water every single day. After all, we know good quality water is critical to keeping yourself hydrated and healthy. But that's the thing. What does good quality actually mean? Because if you're like most people, the answer is probably something like clean or safe. But what does that mean? Now here's the thing. Unlike food, for some reason we have this tendency to look at water as a commodity. You've got water that's safe to drink and water that's not safe. Black and white. But just like food that's marketed as healthy, water that's marketed as healthy sometimes is actually the worst thing for you. Today I want to let you in on a few dark secrets about the water that you've been drinking. And once you see what I'm about to show you, it's going to explain a lot. Because if you've struggled to reach the health goals you've set in the past, whether that's losing weight, having more energy, overcoming health challenges like digestive issues like candida, things like acid reflux, acne, eczema, in a moment you're about to see why the water that you're drinking right now could be the one thing that's been holding you back. And I want to start by telling you a story because it starts by looking at what's really inside the water that you're drinking right now and what this water is doing to your body. Let me explain. When most people think about the water they're drinking, the image we like to conjure up in our minds, it's something that looks a little like this. It's like it comes from some pristine natural spring from some far off glacier not yet spoiled by man. But in reality, the source of 95% of your drinking water, whether you're in the United States, the UK, Australia, Canada, New Zealand, Europe, whether you're drinking tap water or bottled water, it actually looks more like this. And what I mean by that is virtually all drinking water is treated. Even when it's marketed as natural or spring or artisan, and even when it comes from some far off exotic land. And that's a good thing, by the way, because untreated water for the most part is unsafe to drink. So let's take a look at what that treatment process actually is and what it actually does to the water that you're drinking. What's your drinking water like after it's been treated? Let's start with tap water. So the Environmental Protection Agency, or EPA, which is similar to Ofwat in the UK, is charged with regulating the quality of your drinking water. It requires large public water suppliers, such as cities, to test for contaminants in their water supply every single day, and in some cases, multiple times a day. Now, this is a good thing, but when a city is testing a water supply this large, as you can imagine, there is going to be some variance in that water. Because water that's tested from an area over here isn't necessarily matching what you're drinking, which might be from over here. There's no guarantee that what you're drinking matches what their tests say. And of course, you've always got that possibility of human error. So, when it comes to water, the first thing you need to worry about is the presence of bacteria. Now, we all know not to drink water when you travel to a third world country, but people tend to think that drinking water in a first world country like the UK, USA, Canada or the United States, once it's been treated, is free of bacteria. But as it turns out, this is not always the case. In fact, a study from 2009 looking at the water quality in schools in the United States found the most common contaminant in drinking water was coliform bacteria. What is coliform bacteria? Well, it's the one people tend to be most familiar with. It's E. coli. And in water, the presence of coliform bacteria serves as a marker for fecal contamination. Yes, traces of fecal matter in the water that you could be drinking. Now, to be fair, these bugs don't usually make people sick, and it depends on which strain of the germ turns up. The problem is, not all bacteria in drinking water is as benign as this. For example, check out this article from 2011. And check out this one from 2013. Take a look at those locations. This isn't going on in some sub-Saharan Africa or Southeast Asia. These are cases from the United States, in middle-class towns and places like Virginia, Louisiana and Florida. And this particular strain of bacteria, which is becoming more and more common, by the way, is especially nasty. Now, this sounds like science fiction, right? But this is actually happening right now. And by the way, we're going to go into how this relates to the alkaline diet and to your health in just a moment. But first, you might be wondering,
How does bacteria like this, like we just saw in those articles that's causing brain conditions, make its way into the water supply in the first place? Because after all, as you probably know, in the United States and in most developed countries, chlorine is added to the drinking water to make sure that bacteria like this doesn't survive. The only problem with that, in the United States under the EPA regulations, chlorine cannot be undetectable in more than 5% of the samples each month. Think about it. In other words, what that means is, as long as 95% of the water samples tested contain detectable amounts of chlorine, the EPA is satisfied. So if you do the maths on this, if 5% of the water tested doesn't contain detectable amounts of the bacteria killing chlorine, what that means under those standards is there's a 1 in 20 chance that the water you're drinking doesn't contain enough chlorine to be detectable, and therefore you could be exposed to this bacteria on a regular basis. Or to put it another way, think of it like this: every 20 glasses of water you drink, you've been put at risk. And that's not just in the USA either. Look at this report from Thames Water in London in the UK. In London, 1 in every 20 glasses of water contained health-threatening contaminants. One weed killer in particular was above the limit in 38% of samples of the drinking water in London. But let's be honest here, cases of brain-eating bacteria in drinking water are extremely rare, and a lot of water is free from bacteria at this level of risk. And the reason why is because, for the most part, chlorine, well, it does a damn good job at what it's supposed to do. What it's supposed to do is kill organisms. That's why it's put there. But think about that for a second. If chlorine is able to kill more than 99% of bacteria and living cells that would otherwise be found in your drinking water, what do you think that chlorine does to the cells in your body when you ingest that same water? You see, chlorine has been hailed as the saviour against cholera and various other waterborne diseases, and rightfully so, because its disinfectant qualities are great, and the fact that it's inexpensive to produce is just a solution for the water boards. In fact, chlorine has provided disease-free water to millions of people around the world. But here's the thing: chlorine is essentially bleach. And what comes out of most people's taps in their homes is quite actually a mild bleach solution. So if you're drinking water from the tap, you're basically drinking a diluted form of bleach. And for decades, bleach, chlorine, has been linked to so many different types of cancers. That's why there's warning labels the size of Texas on the side of that bleach container in your laundry room. And it's why those labels tell you not to let your kids or pets or anyone else within 10 feet of the container. But again, here's the thing. Well, of course you don't want to be ingesting that chlorine. Chlorine isn't even the biggest problem in our drinking water. At least chlorine is put there intentionally with a noble purpose, but what's worse, the industrial chemicals, the pesticides and the pharmaceutical waste that's leached into the water supply. These chemicals that governments and private water companies have got absolutely no ability to control. For example, in West Virginia, a huge spill of 4-methylcyclohexane methanol got dumped into the drinking water supply. And who knows how many years and how far a reach that spill would have. I know for sure I wouldn't trust that water again in my lifetime. This is just one small example. This kind of thing happens all of the time. Do you remember the movie Erin Brockovich with Julia Roberts from a few years ago? Now, in case you're not familiar with it, it won an Academy Award for telling the true story of how the energy company called Pacific Gas and Electric leached a highly carcinogenic chemical called hexavalent chromium into a California community's local water supply. Now, in case you're not familiar with it, hexavalent chromium is a chemical that's been linked to cancer, congenital disease, miscarriages, and dozens of other tissue-killing disorders. And hexavalent chromium, well, it's everywhere. In fact, take a look at this chart right here. That's the hexavalent chromium in safe levels at the top of the chart, and then all of the US states that are failing to meet that level, and some by up to 10,000%. And what about the case of the 20 tonnes of aluminium sulphate that leaked into the water supply at a water treatment plant in the UK? This is still regularly causing news as more cases of toxic poisoning are coming to light years on from when that spill happened. Remember, aluminium is a well-recognised neurotoxin. Now, and these examples and the other cases that are out there, they're not isolated in some industrial backwater town. This is in your backyard. And these examples, well, these are just a few of the hundreds of dangerous contaminants that the EPA has found in your drinking water. And let's just look at a few of these statistics. According to studies by the excellent Environmental Working Group known as the EWG, traces of pharmaceutical chemicals have been found in the drinking water of at least 14% of US water sources. That affects 41 million Americans. Their study found over 316 contaminants in US tap water. And the shocking thing is, 202 of these contaminants are completely unregulated and therefore have got no safety standards. No one is measuring these contaminants. And here are just a few. Bromochloroacetic acid, found in the water supply to 40 million Americans. This has been associated with gene mutations and damage to DNA. Perchlorate, a rocket fuel ingredient, was found in water provided to 26 million people. This has been found to be toxic to the thyroid gland. MTBE, which is a gasoline additive and a groundwater pollutant that was found in the supply to 12 million people. This has been associated with liver and kidney damage and nervous system effects. And dibutyl phthalate, which is found in the water used by 5 million people, which has been linked to birth defects and reproductive toxicity. That's just 4 examples from the 316 that the Environmental Working Group found. And should we start on fluoride, which has been linked in studies in the Lancet and the Harvard School of Public Health to causing toxic damage to brain development, and it's now a classified neurotoxin. And yet this is something we still knowingly have in our tap water. So let's just recap on where we've got to on tap water so far. The problem here with tap water is that it can contain unfiltered toxins from the ground, heavy metals, bacteria that can cause problems as serious as being brain eating, and chemicals, pesticides and toxins that nobody can control, not even the government. But then what they can control, well, it's almost worse. Fluoride, chlorine and the disinfectant byproducts that come from chlorine, they're not almost worse, they're definitely worse. So you have to try to find a way to stop drinking unfiltered tap water. And by the way, if you're thinking to yourself right now that you don't need to worry about any of this because you only drink bottled water, well, think again. Because did you realise that an estimated 40% of bottled water is actually just tap water? And studies have actually found bottled water in many cases to be worse. And here's another example. Municipalities and water boards that provide tap water are actually held to stricter water purity standards than private bottled water companies. Because remember when we talked about testing and how municipalities are required to test their water samples every day? Well, by comparison, in the United States, the FDA only requires private bottlers to test for contaminants once a week, and in some cases only once a year or every 4 years. And the standards can be even more relaxed in other countries. So in other words, that bottle of water that you're drinking, who knows the last time that water was tested? And the other thing you need to worry about with bottled water is this, the container. And here's why. Did you realise that 95% of water bottles are made with a plastic that contains the substance known as bisphenol A, more commonly known as, and what you might know it as BPA. Now BPA is everywhere. It's used in soda cans, canned food, even on the paper which retailers print your store receipt. But what happens in bottled water, as the water sits on a warehouse or on store shelves or in your home for days, weeks and sometimes months, the BPA from the plastic slowly leaches into the water that you're drinking. And any sort of heat, like when the bottle of water is left in a hot car or when it's transported to the factory, heat accelerates that process by a factor of 10. In another Harvard study, subjects saw a 70% increase in BPA in their urine after just 1 week of using BPA-laden polycarbonate bottles. And that is not a good thing because BPA, well, in the Harvard study, they refer to BPA as a plastics component and synthetic estrogen linked to cancer, reproductive system damage, and other serious conditions. It's linked to all sorts of health problems, and the people that are most affected are children and reproductive aged adults, because most of the problems tend to mess with our hormones and our reproductive system. Like, for example, in several animal studies, when exposed to just tiny doses of BPA, females tended to have earlier puberty, longer menstrual cycles, chromosomal abnormalities in their eggs, and a whole host of other fertility problems. And men, well, they don't fare any better either. Males tend to have decreased testosterone levels, fewer sperm, more abnormal sperm, and a heightened risk for prostate cancer. Essentially, drinking water from bottles in BPA plastic is like ingesting estrogen every single day. And worse, yes, it does get worse. In some studies, both males and females exposed to BPA tend to weigh more and have more body fat, which is why in some European countries and Canada, they've started to ban BPA from things like baby bottles. But the bad news, for the most part, those bans haven't made their way to drinking water just yet. So bottled water in many cases can actually be worse than drinking water directly from the tap. So by now, if you're like most people, you're probably starting to think, well, isn't the answer to everything we've been talking about simply to filter the water you drink before you drink it? Because after all, filtering will get rid of all that stuff we've been talking about. Well, I'll tell you what, I 100% agree with this. As much as you can, you definitely want to drink water that you've filtered yourself, for all the reasons we've talked about here and more. But there's two things here. Number one, not all filter methods are created equal, and this is something we're going to talk about a lot more. Number two, filtering is actually only part of the solution, because there's two other problems with tap water and bottled water we haven't even talked about. And these problems are actually far more insidious. But first, let's recap on why tap water and bottled water are no longer a real option. Tap water can contain chemicals, bacteria, pesticides, heavy metals, chlorine, disinfectant byproducts, fluoride. And bottled water? Well, most of the time it's just tap water anyway, but with less strict testing standards. And it's in plastics that can leach into the water. But it doesn't end there. And as I mentioned, there are two problems we haven't even covered yet. The first problem is pH. So, let me explain. If you spent any time on my site, or if you've studied the Alkaline diet at all, then you'll probably know a few basic facts about your body. Like the fact that your body has to keep your blood, your cells and other fluids at a pH level of 7.365, which is just slightly alkaline. And whenever you ingest anything that's acidifying, whether that's a food or a liquid, your body has to work hard, like a hamster on a never-ending hamster wheel, to get itself back to that alkaline state. This wears out your body in the process. Now, this is why the Alkaline diet focuses on trying to have 60 to 80% of everything you eat comprised of alkalizing foods like green vegetables and non-sugary fruits and things like that. Well, here's the thing. Just like your body will do whatever it takes to regulate your temperature, it does the same thing for the pH of your body's fluids. It will do anything to maintain that slightly alkaline pH. And what's the big deal about pH? Well, for starters, in even just a slightly acidic state, your red blood cells stop working properly. In fact, once you get into an acidic state, your blood cells begin a biological transformation into bacteria and yeast. It's a process known as pleomorphism, and it's not a good thing. Because when you're too acidic, the bacteria and yeast that's produced, it pollutes your entire internal system with a harmful waste byproduct. This puts extra stress on your body. And in turn, that exacerbates whatever health issues you might have, whether that's holding on to extra weight, lacking energy, skin conditions, candida, you name it. For example, did you realise this? Your lungs, your liver and your kidneys, they all use a special mechanism to buffer that extra acidity. But when these systems are overloaded and your body is still too acidic, what happens is this. Calcium is extracted from your bones to buffer that acid in your bloodstream. This is going to put you at risk of all sorts of bone disorders and all sorts of conditions, including things like osteoporosis. Now, you're not going to see this until years from now when it's too late. But in the meantime, well, all that extra acid has to go somewhere, right? Well, that somewhere, it ends up being your muscles, your joints, your connective tissues, and at the same time, this all causes inflammation throughout your body, which leads to all sorts of other conditions. It zaps your energy and it leaves you in that constant state of mild fatigue. In short, the results of an overly acidic system create a vicious cycle, leaving you sick and tired. Now, throughout the course of the day, your body naturally produces acid through its normal bodily functions like metabolism, but this isn't the problem. The problem starts to occur when your diet primarily consists of acidifying foods and beverages that overwhelm that small alkaline buffer. Foods like colas, sugars, breads, sweets, pizzas, chips, alcohol, pastas, rice, dairy, meats, you know the stuff. And for most people, while they can, clearly understand that those foods are acid forming, what they don't realise is often the most frequent acid-producing substance that they consume on a daily basis is the tap and bottled water that they put in their mouth. So if you've been working hard on your diet but you haven't been seeing the results, this could be the reason. Let me explain. As you probably know, the pH scale is logarithmic, which means foods and drinks with a pH 6 are 10 times more acidic than pH 7. pH 5 is 100 times more acidic than pH 7, and pH 4 is 1,000 times more acidic, and so on. Just to give you a frame of reference, cola typically has a pH of between 2 and 3, meaning it's one of the most acidifying substances that's legally sold for human consumption. Now, when it comes to water, the magic number you really want to be aiming for is about pH 9 to 9.5, because anywhere really from 8.5 up to 9.5, it actually helps to buffer those acids and add to the precious alkaline buffer in your body. The problem is, most drinking water from tap and bottled sources has a pH of somewhere between 3 and 7. In fact, if you take a look at this chart from a recent study, you'll see the measured pH from a number of different brands of bottled water, and most of these fall somewhere between pH 3 and pH 5.9. So what is it that makes most drinking water from tap and bottled so acidic? Well, it comes down to a couple of things. First is the treatment process. You see, most bottled water is treated using reverse osmosis. Now, the problem is with reverse osmosis is that it makes water highly acidic. It typically takes it from a neutral pH of 7 down to a pH in the neighbourhood of 5 or even worse. And the second thing going on is this: most water sources, especially with tap water, in our modern polluted world are acidic in the first place. Plus, there's acidic metal ions in the water, either from the plumbing system used or from waste matter in the ground itself. And plus, of course, on top of this, you've got the potential for pollutants and chemicals that we've already mentioned. You know, chlorine is not too alkaline forming. And even the best premium brands of bottled water that would cost you an arm and a leg don't even come close to that minimum target of pH 8.5. They might have been 8.5 at source, and that's what they're telling you on the bottle, the pH at source. But by the time it's been bottled, manufactured, stored in plastic and delivered, it's a different story, especially if it's been filtered with that reverse osmosis. You see, there's only two real ways that you can take water and make it more alkaline. One is by either chemically changing the water by adding things to it like minerals, or two is by increasing the hydrogen ions, which is done by filtering it in a very specific way. And where is this water in nature? Well, there are actually very few totally unspoiled natural springs left that have got that alkaline, mineral-rich water. And if we could walk to those, to the river or the spring with a bucket to source this every day, life would be perfect. But instead, we have to do whatever we can to recreate that perfect natural water. And we'll talk about the ways that you can do this at home in just a little while. But first, we need to talk about the last problem with the water that you've been drinking. And this one is probably both the least understood by most people, and at the same time, in many ways, it can be the most harmful. The problem I'm talking about is oxidation. Let me explain. If you're like most people, then you've probably heard about antioxidants and how they're good for you, and how certain foods like blueberries and green vegetables are filled with them. But what exactly do antioxidants do? Simply put, antioxidants are molecules that block the activity of harmful chemicals in your body known as free radicals. Free radicals are what cause your body and your cells to age. They're also highly reactive and can create cell damage and can even lead to cancer. Now, rust, which most people are familiar with, that's a form of oxidation. And the presence of free radicals essentially causes your body to slowly rust from the inside out. This is why you see people whose skin, hair, eyes and other cells look much older than their age. In a word, oxidation is the aging process of your body. And antioxidants, well, they slow that process down. Which is why we need to do everything we can to consume a diet that is rich in antioxidant foods. The only problem? Most of us are not getting even nearly enough high antioxidant foods to combat the oxidative stress that's in our everyday lives. And the list of foods that's rich in antioxidants is short. Plus, those foods tend to be quite expensive and not very convenient. In fact, you need to eat a ton to make any sort of difference. And worse, the foods and beverages that have a harmful oxidizing effect on your body is huge. It practically includes everything else. And guess what is one of the most commonly consumed oxidizing substances? You guessed it, tap and bottled water. Let me explain. You see, in addition to pH, water is also measured according to something called ORP, which stands for oxygen reduction potential. ORP is the standard scale used to measure antioxidant content, and anything with a positive ORP, a plus ORP, oxidizes and ages your body, and it deposits harmful free radicals into your system. Basically, having high ORP foods and drinks would be cancelling out the positive effects of any antioxidant foods you might be eating. And just to give you a frame of reference, tap water usually has an ORP of around positive 150 to positive 350. Cola and fizzy carbonated drinks, they've got an ORP of approximately 350 to positive 550. And bottled water, well, that's got an ORP of anywhere between positive 300 and positive 650, which means in some cases, bottled water can be as oxidizing to your body as drinking cola. To put it another way, if you're drinking 3 to 4 litres of positive ORP water every day, you would need to eat a mountain of greens and berries every single day for the rest of your life, just to counteract the harmful effects of this water that you're drinking. You see, when it comes to ORP, the magic number you're aiming for is anywhere between negative 150 to negative 450. That's the sweet spot. And to get to that number, you need to filter your water in a very specific way, which we'll be getting to. And just to remind you, negative 150 to negative 450, pH 9.5, unpolluted water is what we're supposed to be drinking. This is what's found in nature, in the untouched, unspoiled springs and rivers and waterfalls and mountains, and this is what we're trying to replicate and get to as close to as possible. So first, let's recap what we've covered today, because I know we've covered a lot. Tap and bottled water aren't recommended for you or your family to be drinking anymore if you want to get alkaline, get more energy and get to your health goals. It doesn't matter if you're in the USA, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, the UK, Europe, or even the Swiss Alps. This problem is affecting every first world country around the world. And if you think you're better off with bottled water, well, as we saw, bottled water can actually be worse than tap water, because bottled water is often only tested once a week at best for those contaminants. The treatment process with reverse osmosis can create a highly acidic pH as low as 3, and the ORP, which is how oxidizing it is to your body, is aging your body and destroying your cells every time you drink it. Now, before we get into the answer that solves everything we've covered today, I want to tell you something. I know this is a lot to take in, and if you're a health conscious person who's been drinking tap or bottled water, or if you've been drinking filtered water like reverse osmosis, but you didn't realize the harmful effects that the acidic pH and the positive ORP of that water is having on your body, it's not your fault. I'm going to say that again, it's not your fault. But this is why I'm telling you all of this. I'm telling you this because I think you deserve to know the truth. And here's the thing, it's not all bad news either, because there's good news. Then the good news is that you can dramatically improve the water that you drink with just a few basic techniques. And it's actually surprisingly inexpensive and actually quite easy to do. In fact, there's 7 methods that you can use, and I'm going to teach you every single one of them, including the exact technique that I use for my own drinking water. So that's what we're going to talk about in the next video in this series. I'm going to teach you each of those 7 methods. I'm going to demonstrate every single one for you, and I'm going to walk you through them one by one, step by step, so you can start using them right away. In the meantime, if you can do me a favour, I've got a special gift for you today. In the comments section below this video, tell me what's the biggest takeaway you've had from today's video. Also, what would you like me to make sure that I cover in that next video in this series? If you take a moment to do that now, that would be absolutely fantastic. You know, I'm so deeply passionate about spreading this message as far and wide as possible, and it would be great if you can help play your part, get this momentum with me by hitting the share button below. Let's see how many people we can get this message in front of so that we can make a big impact. And as a way of saying thanks, I'm going to email you my free copy of my Water, Lies and Myths guide, which explains all of the stuff we've talked about today in a bit more detail, as well as a few of the additional things we didn't have a chance to talk about. In the meantime, I'm going to leave you with this. If you want to be successful with that alkaline diet, no matter what your health goals are, whether you know that's all those things like losing weight, getting more energy, getting rid of skin conditions, getting rid of candida, getting rid of fatigue once and for all, it doesn't matter what your goal, the quality of the water is the single most important ingredient that you can consume. You can do everything else right, but if you're drinking poor quality water, you're sabotaging yourself. And in that next video, I'm going to show you how to get the results that you deserve and the results that you want by teaching you how to make that pure, alkaline, antioxidant water. It's going to make you feel like you've never felt before. It's going to be so much fun. So stay tuned, because in the next video we're going to get onto the good stuff. Now have a great rest of your day, and I'll talk to you in that next video. Stay tuned and I'll see you soon.